today we're talking about transformation, and that is change management is a change in an organization, typically an individual application or change. Transformation is fundamentally redefining how an organization exists and is relevant, and the behaviors in that organization that are needed. And so it's with that rather humbling approach that we've invited 3 people on the stage, and I appreciate very much the time that you're giving us. So Tim Harden and Doug Moore and Kanchana are going to share a little bit about what they've learned, and we would like this, to the extent that it too can have a Q&A or a contribution for the team, we'd appreciate it. So, okay, so thank you very much for joining us.
Pleasure.
Appreciate your coming from he's back-to-back board meeting here, really appreciate it. So I'm going to start with asking you to introduce yourself, especially whatever you call yourself now in terms of your role in the industry, and each of you. And then while you're introducing yourself, if you could explain what you define leadership as we tackle this.
Great. So I'm Tim Harden, retired AT&T supply chain fleet operations.
Thank you.
I'm now actually working with a number of different companies in the industry, trying to make sure that as the industry changes dramatically in the next few years, that they're actually relevant when we get to 2020 and the networks are software defined and network function virtualization is kind of a key. So that's keeping me busy, and so,
So leadership
I've sort of retired, but not really.
Not really, definitely. And what is leadership then to you, if you think about, as we discussed?
So if you think about the industry, what's different right now, what I see is the pace of the change is different. There's a couple of constants, though, that we still have to pay attention to as we go through this transformation. One is, whatever technology we bring on board, the customer has to see that as seamlessly transitioning to this new technology. And if you think about kind of where we are, particularly the Fortune 500, those companies have gone through a number of changes. They've gone through their big transformations to get to ATM or other data opportunities, and they're not real anxious to go through another transformation unless it pays big dividends. And the big dividend comes when you actually get enough coverage with software-defined networks that you can take the cost factor way down and you can improve the efficiency of their operations. And that causes us, as we start to go through these transitions, to really look at a couple of main factors. One, you have to still pay attention on a regular basis to allowing people to get in front of the decision making. So if you're leading a large team, my experience has been, having gone through this a number of different times, is those folks need to clearly understand what they can decide on and what they can't, so that they can in fact move the ball forward for you. And then you need some really good metrics to see exactly what's going on as you go through the transformation, at what phase. And then thirdly, this is not just change, it's transformation. Transformation, by its very nature, implies that it's multi-departmental, which means that you're going to have a lot of other folks sitting around the table helping you through this transitional evolution to the new technologies. You need the folks that are in the public sector. You need the folks that are the engineers, of course. You need the operations folks. You need the IT people sitting at the table at the same time while you're making the decisions about how fast you go and what you introduce. So the leadership aspect of this, the certain constants that are still there, got to pay attention to the customer, got to pay attention to the schedule, got to pay attention to the costs. Those are givens. But the speed at which you go requires, in many cases, for you to step back and say, how do I enable the process to actually move forward faster?
Okay. That could have been a whole 3-month series at Harvard Business School, by the way, that lesson. Okay, Kanchana, explain how you got to this point in your career as CEO and what leadership is to you at this point.
Well, first of all, I'm really honored to be on the stage with my mentor, Tim Harden. So thank you, sir. And I'm Kanchana Raman. I'm president and CEO of Avion Networks. I've been an entrepreneur for 21 years. And 2 years ago, I sold a portion of my company to Tech Mahindra. And I think leadership to me is willingness to innovate, willingness to be entrepreneurial. So I think that's, when I look at our own company, we've been part of the 2G build out, 3G build out, 4G build out, and now 5G build out, and how we have been able to bring in analytics, data analytics as a differentiator to add value to our customers, and again, listen to the voice of the customer. So that to me is leadership.
Okay, Doug?
Good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome to the Shram Jam.
Great, that's perfect.
I've spent 2.5 days here, and I have watched Susan move with complete poise and purpose from session to session to session. You're doing a phenomenal job.
Thank you.
And it just amazes me how organized you are. So I'm Chief Operating Officer for Fujitsu Network Communications in the U.S. So we serve our customers solutions, network solutions, across the North American region. For me, the challenge, and I think leadership, Tim summed it up, is really about creating awareness for change and recognition that change is necessary, and then enabling it, right? It's getting the motivation to move in a new direction, and then enabling that direction.
So, excuse me, but haven't we been doing this for like 3 decades?
But you didn't burn the bridge.
Okay, so what's the difference now? Because each of you, when I approached you about this, you jumped in and said, yes, because it's so important right now, it's different. What's different?
I think, to that point, this is a dramatic transformation away from where we've been for the last 35 years as an industry. It really is burning the bridge as you move into software-defined networks, and certainly the evolution of routing. And that requires a certain trust factor that as you move forward, in fact, you'll be able to be successful. And what makes you successful? Manage into the key points that allow you to deliver on time, and really ensuring that, in fact, you have a really good sight to how far along the technology is, at what point do you introduce it, at what point do you throw it back to testing, how much do you trust the vendor, how much do you bring them to the table with you to actually help create this, how much do you bring third party in, which is even more the factor with open source and others now participating. Those are all new factors in the evolution to where we are right now.
So is there a higher level of uncertainty as a leader right now?
Yes, I think so, and I'll let these folks describe their uncertainty.
Okay, now, Kanchana, AT&T is a huge organization, and yours is somewhat smaller. What are the challenges that you find? Isn't managing in a small company just easy? What is the difference you find between when you manage an organization that's smaller scale versus these larger companies? What's the same issues that you're finding, and what do you find is unique to a small organization?
I think, when you're servicing Fortune 100 customers, there's really nothing small about you anymore. That is the reality of the situation. Is you have to align with your customer, you have to align with where your customer is heading, what is their direction. And again, we are in a B2B market space. So for example, when you look at the FirstNet build out or even the 5G build out, I would be sitting and thinking, how am I going to innovate? And how am I going to be ready to support my customers' vision and where they want to be in their timelines? And so if you, again, in terms of digitization, which I think all of us are moving from that industrial age to the digital age, and if you look at, digitization as scale, scope, and speed, how do we, align with that vision of speed to market, right, and the timeline to launch cell sites, and how are we able to bring that value in terms of, bringing in analytics? So, we would have the same challenges in terms of physical deployment of people nationwide, but if we could do a small market and bring in, prescriptive and predictive analytics platform to learn best practices and gaps that we could share with our customer in terms of them expanding, nationwide, and also bring in, workforce optimization in terms of utilizing drones or automation. So those are the kind of values. Again, as a small company, I think we're nimble and agile, and we can do those kind of things. So I think in terms of, small business or big business, it is the marketplace that drives behavior.
That's a great summary. So I'm going to pick up on the point you said about the word agile. You've managed, Doug, this whole transformation of the world of agile and DevOps and this behavioral change in organizations. We talked in the workforce discussion. We talked in the security in operating networks yesterday about this. It's a people issue at the end of the day. It sounds very technical, but it came down to people and behavior. What's your lessons learned in terms of this transformation, or is this really the sea change that Tim was talking about?
This is my view of the world, and if you pick up on Tim's point about what's prompting the need now, our innovation cycle in society, I think, is much faster than it was 10 years ago or 20 years ago. So what that means to people like me and our company is products are really perishable. Nobody buys a 2-year-old iPhone because they want to, right? You don't go out and say, hey, can I get a 3-year-old laptop? Because it's already old, it's out of date. And so what it means is the technologies that we're building for the networks, the solutions, have a much shorter shelf life than they used to. So that means our development process has to speed up. And as you move into software-defined and virtualized technologies, what it means is the traditional serial process that we used, we used to call a waterfall process, where we would specify the requirements, we'd spend a year planning that, and then another year developing it, and then another year testing it, and then I'd bring Tim up a product, and he'd say, that's great, but there's 16 things that are broken, start all over again. That worked 5 years ago, 10 years ago, it won't work today.
Right.
So what do we have to do to move into that agile environment? We have to think about people and organizations. Agile development processes really require a much closer collaboration, and they require much deeper self-managed teams that meet frequently and share information. And that means really less management. So our organization has become flatter, right? We have a lot of Scrum leaders as opposed to managers or engineers who are managers trying to manage an engineering process. So Scrum leaders do. And then the second part is strong process to move the ball forward. And then I think the final challenge that we see, not just with our own employees, but our customers, are the outcomes. Because you build things in small increments and minimum viable products, and by its nature, that means those checkpoints, those collaborations with your customers aren't fully baked. They're not the final product. So it's recognizing that as you collaborate together.
I want to pick up on what Doug said on the whole decision-making process has been flipped on its end, and not rightfully so, right? You can't afford to have everybody get in a room and have a meeting and then go to the next layer and have another meeting, go to the next layer, have another meeting, and then make a decision. It's too long of a process in today's world. So you need to be able to clearly define who has the ability to make the decision. It may be the team that jointly agrees to do that. It may be individuals on the team who can move that forward. And then they have to have clearly defined how far can I go definitions.
Authority,
right?
so they know.
You can go to here, but if you go past that point, now you got to go and talk to somebody different. But back to this notion of how fast can you iterate to a new product, the decision-making process is really critical.
So you've teed up on several soft skills for leaders that it challenges us with, okay? And yesterday in the breakout about the workforce, we talked about the fact that, yes, there are a zillion jobs going unfilled right now in our industry, and they are having to do with coding and this kind of stuff, but because of what you just said, we're hiring people into decision-making roles, whether, in the past that might have been a doer. Now, because of the collapsed model, we're actually hiring into being doers and decision makers at some level of authority. I have enjoyed using a common way of thinking about decisions as like a tree. So there's some decisions that you make at the branch level, or the twig level, where you got that decision and just make it over and over because you understand that's your role and these are your authorities. And then there's a branch level, which is more of a two-way conversation. And then there's a trunk, which is if you're gonna bet the company, I need to be involved. Right? And so I think that facilitated conversation has to be proactive, right? So communication is a big responsibility, and I'd say that when you talk about people quitting their jobs and leaving, they often leave because the manager they work for, not because of the company. We've been through many, many changes and company ups and downs. And people stay with companies if they like the people they're working for and they feel trusted and they feel encouraged. So what is the onus then on us as leaders to communicate well in this environment?
I'll throw that to you.
I think knowledge, and what you're working on, and again, alignment. I think like Doug said, it's a very flat organization today. I mean, the command and control is thing of the past, and again, very entrepreneurial. If you want the buy-in from the entire team, so it is just not about you anymore. I think
it's not authority where you're the boss and
absolutely.
It's flatter. Do you do team interviews? Do you do team fit?
I do, but I'm a little bit scared about asking them, what do you think about me? So, yes, but definitely we do.
Doug?
I think communication is almost always the crux of most problems in companies. We started a transformation about 4 years ago where, to Tim's point, we actually established a role charter for every person in our company that defines what you're responsible for and what your decision rights are and what you influence. Part of that for all leadership is communication, and so we have ongoing all company things. We have ongoing departmental level activities. The real challenge is it working? So one of the other things that I'm very passionate about is, and I heard in Don's presentation before, the word engagement, and we measure engagement within our company both on an annual basis but on a continuous kind of a pulse check basis. And engagement really gives you two indicators. One is, do people understand what you're saying? And the second is, do they care? They don't have to agree. They don't have to be happy. It doesn't mean satisfaction, but it really boils down to, do they care? And if they care, and even if that's anger and they disagree with what you're doing, that indicates that they're still going to do something, of a positive nature. It's when they disengage that things are bad.
In this room, there are a lot of lessons learned. And I would welcome, does anyone want to does anything that we've said prompt a comment from the audience if you feel? Yes? Okay. Could you get let's get you a microphone.
Okay, well, I don't know.
Yep, we do. Okay, thank you.
I guess.
Yep.
I guess one of the things I would also say when working with other engineers, because I'm also an engineer and aspiring entrepreneur now in technology, I would say the best thing is to tell your employees the why. You really need to give, let them know why they're doing this and what their role is and who they can talk to if they have problems, and also collaboration from all different, types of people, the business people, the software developers, the hardware people, they all need to be, meet at one time. But the why, I think, is really important. It helps them to become more engaged and produce a better product. Because if they understand why, they may come to you and say, well, I have an idea, and their idea may be better than what you originally had planned. So I think that's really important.
Two important themes there that you picked up on. Everybody can have a good idea.
Right.
Okay? So as a leader, you need to be able to create the environment that actually has these ideas bubble up. Now, you can't action every one of the ideas, but everybody needs to feel as though they have the ability to put into the process what the final product is going to look like. Very, very, very important there. I think overall as well, when you look at the teams moving forward, those teams need to feel like they're empowered, which means that we as leaders need to check our egos at the door. Okay, that's hard to do, right? If you're trying to think about transformation, part of the transformation that's happening right now is, you can't bring an ego into the room and you be the only person who gets credit for what happens, okay? It actually is a team that needs to get credit and the company that needs to get credit by introducing this technology earlier than anybody else can get it there. And that becomes the why. Why are we doing this? Because we want to beat the marketplace by 6 months to get a jump on what everybody else is doing. So two key important themes there.
Thank you. Other thoughts? This is the interactive section, so feel free.
Hi, my name is Rangam. I work with the NTA at the Department of Commerce. Very interesting thing on the management philosophy being adapting to the speed and innovation needs, right? Going back like 10 years, 15 years when the startups of the dot-com era was pretty big, it was the same thing. You had to be fast, you had to be agile.
That's right.
And then so many startups created all kinds of junk software. They got out, and people after them were kind of cleaning up, and people have gone through, a lot of companies have been burnt with that attitude. The question also becomes, I understand a lot of IoTs, all kinds of technologies, everything is coming up, but speed and innovation, speed itself, by itself cannot define management in my perspective. There needs to be a balance in terms of how do you prepare the skill sets and how, while maybe the branch is doing, then still the trunk needs to know what's happening in the branch. Otherwise, at the end of the day, trunk is going to fail. So as there is a proverb, I'm not sure if I'm stating it right, the battles can be won with the speed, but then you need to have the right balance to win the war. So what you as leaders are preparing to create that balance in management?
Yeah, and the balance between speed as a highest priority versus the how things are accomplished with quality, execution, repeatability.
Yeah.
And some people, as employees, may choose that they don't like all that dirty stuff, like the how stuff, right? I mean, we definitely are balancing between a startup mentality of let's go and sustaining. I found myself all the last 2 days quoting this often, that God created the world in 6 days, but she didn't have an install base. and I think that some of the challenges is that, there's one kind of enthusiasm that comes from going after the goal, but there's this sort of hard leadership of cleaning up and sustaining and repeating. Any thoughts on how to motivate? Because sometimes they're different personalities, and sometimes they're like maturing people, helping people mature. So,
yeah, I think when you look at a company, I would think about it in 3 phases, right? There's a past, present, and the future. And many times we're always talking about the present, and I think educating the workforce on the future and trying to align, retool, optimize, and educate and train them in terms of what is up and coming. Mm-hmm. I think that'll help them in terms of getting that balance, like what Rangam was talking about, in terms of what you're doing today and what you have to do tomorrow. It's like you don't have a choice not to innovate. You don't have a choice not to go digital, right? Mm-hmm. Because you don't have a choice not to step outside your comfort zone. I mean, I'm comfortable today, right? I like what's going on, but then you're going to be obsolete. So I think that is the sentiment that we need to communicate, educate, and almost push people to step outside the comfort zone.
Thoughts?
Yeah, the challenge in my company, and I think within the industry that's represented here largely, is we have that embedded base, right? right? So we've been doing things a certain way for a long time, and our demographic, not unlike the TIA board meeting on Monday, is mostly middle-aged men. So we're not the most receptive to change. I kind of feel two things are essential to move the ball forward. The first is defining what is the culture and the environment that you want to be, right? Because when we bring new employees in, they don't come in with bad culture, bad behavior, bad thoughts. Anything that they get, it's created by us, right? And then measuring that, creating targets, objectives. Culture's a hard one, but we actually incorporate that in our performance management. So things like teamwork. If you work in a company that is siloed, teamwork is really critical. We measure that in our management. We will measure it in our workforce. And I think that's how you create that balance ultimately, because it can't break, but it has to change and it has to adapt.
Just a thought, I'm going to use a naval reference here. Navy guy, I have to do this. When you make a hard turn in the water, some of you are boaters, okay, right along the edge of that, outside of that turn is really smooth water. If you get outside of that, it's really rough water. And it's hard to get from rough water to smooth water if you get out too far. What's the industry doing right now? It's making a hard pivot, okay? So the challenge for the managers and for the companies and for the technology, folks inventing the technology, is to stay inside of that smooth water, okay? That's the challenge that we have in front of us. And there's lots of ways to try to balance that, but in essence, you better be thinking every day about, what do I need to do to change? What do I need to do with my team to keep them ahead of where the change is going, to make sure that I don't get into the rough water? Because what happens when you get there is companies, get bought and other people step in. So, that's the challenge we have right now, is that we make this hard pivot, and we need to bring people, we need to bring processes, we need to bring quality from the old, which, 5 nines reliability, to the new, which is 5 nines and beyond in terms of reliability. And we need to bring that with us in that smooth water.
And to pick up on the point you're making earlier, that change is an ecosystem change.
Right.
So it's not a model where you simply bring that flat organization along within your company. That flat organization is also made of an entire ecosystem that you're depending on, a supply chain that you depend on, innovation coming from beyond. So it's a leadership role, it's a culture that you're actually extending to be successful, which requires humility, I think, is the point. Right. It's not all about, I told you to do it this way. Right. There's a lot of collaboration, which takes energy sometimes. Sure. So this itself could be a whole seminar, and maybe we do, as an organization, feel a responsibility to the workforce of the future, and I think part of that workforce next steps will be including the issue of leadership. So to end this, I'm going to do the buzzer round, like it's Sunday morning, and I'm going to go down the row and ask you, okay, so if you had one thing to leave with this, folks, in terms of a phrase or a call to action or a message, what would you charge us as leaders in this industry with right now?
Somewhere, at some place, there is someone practicing with great intensity and determination, and if you meet in head-to-head competition, they will beat you.
Wow.
So you always have to assume you have to improve every single day in order to stay ahead.
Okay. Quite a call.
Great. I think a sense of urgency to move and change, and the speed, I think it's extremely important, not to be in denial and to come to terms with what is happening around us. So I would definitely say, you want something on your dashboard, sense of urgency.
I think we need a much greater diversity in our industry, particularly age and sex. And, I made the comment earlier about middle-aged men, but, we're sitting around talking about what does IoT mean, or how do I make this device more friendly? But in Silicon Valley, there's a lot of startup companies who are not thinking that way. They're just saying, how do I make something cool? And, I think our thought process needs to incorporate more of that.
Mm-hmm. And I'll take one after a few decades myself. I would say communication, whether it's good news or bad news, is required. Or uncertainty, even communicating that you don't know yet. But having some ongoing dialogue is sometimes the difference between trust and not having trust. And it's not an instinct sometimes when you're sitting there with no answers, but simply say, I don't know this yet, and I'll check back with you, is probably the biggest gift you can give to people to feel like you have a relationship with them. So I thank you very much, and at this point I'm going to say we will now be moving into our, and Tally, keep me honest, we're moving into our luncheon. Okay, excuse me, right. We're doing a very short break, and we're coming back. And so what we'll be doing then is we're going to give you a view of what the whole group said earlier in all these different breakouts. So the IDC team and I will come back and we'll give you a perspective on what we came out and then what we missed as part of the conversation. So thank you very much. Short break right outside. Come back in 15. Thank you.